Testing, testing. Testing, 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 testing. Testing, testing. Okay. if anyone from the club is stopping in, please put your name in the chat for attendance purposes, and feel free to ask any questions you might have. I am here to serve. And in the meantime, I will get some music going from our guitarist of the week, Mr. Nystrom, over to your right, my left. So, again, name in the chat if you can. That would be lovely. Also, if you could, let me know how my audio levels are as well. If a certain thing is too loud, too quiet. No one's been able to give me an accurate representation of how the audio on the stream is yet, so just want to make sure I'm not deafening anybody. So just a little bit of background on our guitarist of the week there. Mr. Nystrom is the guitarist for the band Katatonia, which is a Swedish sort of, depressive rock group. He's been playing with the band since their debut record back in 1993, Dance of December Souls, which was actually a Celtic Frost doom metal ripoff. And he continued to be their lead guitarist on Brave Murder Day, which was their next album. And that one took their sound in a much more melodic direction than the prior one. And then with their 1998 record, Discouraged Ones, they went full sort of goth rock as opposed to metal. And that was a trend that continued up until today. So what you're hearing now is their 2001 record, Last Fair Deal Gone Down, which is a personal favorite of mine. And I think what I've always really enjoyed about Anders playing is that it's very understated, but the chord work and the lead playing serves the song far better than I think most lead playing does, since they tend to be sort of, in general, disjointed to a certain extent, but they're very fluid in their music, which is something I really enjoy. Again, if anybody's stopping in here from the club, please type your name in the chat for attendance purposes. I want to make sure that you're in the right place, and that we can make sure we know we're getting information to the right people. So again, just put your name in the chat. That would be lovely. Anyway, and also if you could let me know how my audio levels are, would also be appreciated. Yeah, anyway, back to Katatonia. I mean, you can hear here, they've got I think his clean tone is pretty unique, because it's very mid-focused, very sort of mid-position humbucking kind of thing. And part of that necessity, I think, is just a product of the fact that their music switches a lot between distortion and clean tone, and so I think the clean tone is a very organic sort of flip side to that distortion sound, which you'll hear really well in the next track, which switches pretty rapidly between the two. But yeah, again, I think a guitarist that is pretty underrated, in my opinion at least. But I don't know if you've heard of him. I'm somewhat doubtful. I got my Katatonia shirt on to represent the band, but I think in general they're not a super well-known group. But anyway, we'll take a look at a couple of lead parts from their songs in a little bit, where I'm gonna break down a little bit what he's doing and why. But here you can hear a great solo. And you hear how fluid he comes out of that solo into the lead again, and it sits so nicely back in the mix. It's just a very organic and natural extension of the song, as opposed to standing out like a guitar solo would normally do. And I think that serves their style of music, because it is sort of very understated, very melancholic, and that's some really one of the great aspects, I think, of his playing in particular. Another great instance where you can hear his playing is on the 9th track of this album, which is Passing Bird, and I'm going to break down that intro lead for you, but it really is a perfect segue, so take a listen to this. So that intro riff is just, it sits somewhere between a riff and a lead, and I think that is one of the super interesting aspects of Anders playing, because, you know, he's taking these lead parts, which in any other, I guess, metal band would get thrown into the front of the mix, but he lets it sit in the back, and that is one of the aspects that helps them transition between parts so fluidly, because there is such a dynamic range to their music. So I'm going to break down that lead part for you. Traditionally, I believe this song is in drop C sharp. I'm going to just check that real quick. But I'll have to retune if that's the case. Yeah, ooh, no, actually, it's just a half step down. Okay, so they're not dropping in this instance. Okay, so again, if you're not unfamiliar with the term drop, a drop tuning is a tuning in which the lower string is a whole step below what it would normally be in standard tuning. So for instance, drop D means that we take the normal E, A, D, G, B, E, and we drop the bottom string to a further D. And the advantage of that is that it allows you to play power chords with only one finger. And so that's why a lot of bands, particularly in rock and genres where the power chord is pretty prevalent, they like to play in those drop tunings, because it can make it very, very easy to play pretty complex power chord sections in sequence. So that's one of the reasons you'll see drop tunings a lot. But this particular song and that intro riff is just in E flat standard, which is just all of the strings down a half step. So I'm just going to switch to a distortion channel here so we can get this properly. That's kind of loud. Let me just check these audio levels real quick. Alright, perfect. Okay. So this riff is based around the harmonic minor scale, which is what gives it that very sort of haunting, unique vibe. So... Whoops. Yeah, anyway, sorry, that hammer-on's a little tricky. So anyway, so we're essentially what we're in is I gotta do the math in my head since we're now a half step down. Okay, yeah. We're in, I believe. Holy moly, my brain's not working too all the way. Anyway, we're in the harmonic minor scale pattern of the 9th fret, because our pentatonic minor, that pentatonic minor there, you can modulate it to become a harmonic minor simply by moving on the B string that note up one fret. And also, technically, you move on the D string, you move it up one fret too. And that sort of takes what would normally just be that sort of pentatonic, and it makes it sort of a bit more eerie, a bit more haunting. And that's sort of the advantage of harmonic minor. So in this instance, he's starting on the within the pentatonic minor scale. Then he throws in that sharp 7. And then he moves down the pattern 1 fret. And then there's that little ham pull off from the 8 to the 7. And that's just a very fluid passage. But that melody is going to serve the chords later on really well, as you'll hear. And he just repeats that a couple times. And one of the really interesting things I personally think about that particular lick that they do production-wise is if you listen to the recording, which I'll play it back for here in the intro, it switches channels if you're using headphones. So it's in the left channel here. And then it goes to the right channel. And again, it's sitting so far back in the mix, but it's perfect for the song. And that drum riff that brings us into the verse is super unique. And that chord progression is super funky, and it's such a classic Catatonia chord progression. It uses this play between dissonance and consonance so unbelievably well that it's sometimes hard to believe, if you ask me. But I mean, that's a concept that is not foreign to metal. This play between dissonance and consonance. And when we say dissonance and consonance, those are sort of music theory terms, I realize now. Essentially, dissonance is, think of like a diminished chord. Some of the notes they're not forming nice overtones, they're forming bad overtones. But while a dissonant chord on its own can be very out of place, if you resolve it, it can be a super useful tool for your chord progression. And you hear how that tension makes that resolve so much more potent because of how dissonant that chord is. And that's the thing that Anders is particularly good at. So anyway, this riff it's a bit of a finger bender, this central chord pattern. So we start on an A minor, not too bad. Then we move up essentially what would be your F chord pattern. We just move it up to the 3rd fret. But where it gets difficult is it's not how you would normally finger it. Because, he said, baiting suspense, the next chord is that F sharp augmented, which gives it such a unique voicing. But what you can do is, if you're particularly dexterous with your fingers, I don't know how well you can see this, but we're in that F shape. You can kind of move it over to give that augmented chord. So it's not too much of a stretch. So we're in that A minor. And I actually sometimes, in this particular song, I like to switch how I finger my A minor, because it's pretty natural to put your middle finger on the D string and your ring finger on the G string. I switch it because it makes switching into that F sharp so much easier. So you can find, if you're trying to play people's chord progressions, that what would be sort of a typical fingering for your chords, you would switch how that fingering looks, just because it makes transitioning into the next chord a lot easier. And that's something I find myself doing all the time. So in this instance, I'm switching up my A minor fingering to make that switch even better. And it's essentially just those 3 chords. But he throws in what's a D sharp sus4 in this tuning. Again, I have to remind you that this is down a half step. pattern is what goes through all the verses, and it's super interesting, I think, because that F sharp augmented plays so nicely against the F, and then doesn't quite resolve into that D sharp sus, and so it just gives it this super eerie vibe, that there's always something a little bit off, and that song resolves a lot of that tension in its bridge, which I'm going to play for you now, and it's an absolutely killer riff, one of my absolute favorite riffs that Anders has ever written, but it is absolutely crushing. And so anyway, nice little bass riff there to bring us in. So this is the chorus, and it's kind of brings in sort of this DSPM repeated pattern. It's just repeated power chords, so it's not super complex. Nice little offbeat syncopated thing. This is the riff I wanted to show off here. That riff there is so simple, but so easy. Sorry, my audio interface just decided to crap out on me. Let me just check to make sure. Yeah, there we go. Anyway, so that audio, my brain, not always there, kids. Anyway, that particular riff is so simple but so effective, and it plays off arpeggios very nicely. So we're going to go back to the drive sound because it is with gain. Alright, so what we're doing is we're arpeggiating what is kind of an awkward chord to finger, but it's not too bad in my opinion. You're essentially... and again, it's playing with this concept of consonance and dissonance very well, because this is a very dissonant chord. And then there's those bends at the bottom, which are bringing the note in and out of tune, which further reinforces that sort of war of consonance versus dissonance. So you kind of hear how that first chord is not super dissonant. It's got sort of a sus quality to it. The next chord, that's pretty dissonant. Then we repeat that first triad. And they do the same thing in the chorus with that consonance and dissonance, where they play, they're playing an inverted power chord. And an inverted power chord means you just flip where the root, the octave and the fifth are. So the fifth is on the bottom. There's your root, there's your fifth. Or rather, sorry, there's your octave, there's your fifth. Anyway, an inverted power chord really just means 3, 3, 5 instead of 3, 5, 5. But what they do is they'll switch from that fifth to a diminished fifth, which gives you a tritone, which is a super interesting progression. So, because tritones, of course, are possibly the most dissonant internal. And so that, again, that riff in the chorus They love that kind of thing. It's just a really common progression in Anders' vocabulary, is just moving from and all you're doing is moving your ring finger down 1 fret. That's it. That's all you have to do, and it makes this interesting back and forth between that dissonance and that consonance. And that's what plays into his use of the harmonic minor. I remember it. So again, every sort of aspect of his playing is sort of rooted in that conflict. And I think that's a super unique aspect to his playing, and one of the reasons he's a personal favorite guitarist of mine, and why I think it's definitely worthwhile to check out some of his stuff, even though, you know, he's not the most technical player on the planet, although he can definitely shred. He also plays in the band Bloodbath, which is an old school death metal group, and there you kind of see where he can shred. But he's very reserved in the context of Katatonia, and I think his playing and his stressing of those concepts is what makes it so unique. So that's going to wrap it up for our discussion of the guitarist of the week. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. We're going to now move into our lesson section, which is, something I totally remember. Yes, of course. Our lesson for this week is going to be concerning bar chords and how to think about forming chord progressions with bar chords. So, you know, spend a lot of time with open chords. So when you finally do broach the world of bar chords, it can be a little intimidating, because suddenly where you had a set of chords that was rooted in just these 3 frets, suddenly you're looking at chords all over the neck, and it can be really intimidating to think about, well, which chords do I use? First thing you need to reassure yourself is there's no such thing as a wrong chord, just a chord put out of context. That's the most critical aspect, I think, is never be afraid to experiment. If something doesn't sound good, you can always make it sound good by placing a different chord in context. There's a really interesting video on YouTube that I watched where you essentially, you blindfold out of like a hat, pick a series of notes, and those notes become a chord, and then based off that chord, you have to form a chord progression. And people who have studied music theory for years, it's no problem for them to make something that sounds any number of emotions just by where they place certain chords in context. So you can combine any set of chords to sound interesting as long as you fit the right melody and the right structure to it. So when you're thinking about initially wanting to form your own chord progressions with bar chords, don't be worried about making everything sound perfect, because, you can make anything work if you put the right dressings around it. But anyway, there are some simple things you can do to think about bar chords. And the first is I'm just going to show you how easy it is to make a 1-4-5 progression using bar chords. So if you don't know what a 1-4-5 progression is, the 1 chord is the tonic, so rooted in whatever key we're in. So if I'm in the key of A, we'll say my A major is my 1 chord. And then the A major scale, if you don't know, the A major scale has 3 sharps. So if you don't know what that means, definitely check out the videos we linked in an email about understanding what it means to be in a key. Essentially, every key, certain notes in that key are sharp or flat, meaning they're up a semitone or a fret, if you want to think about it in terms of frets. Anyway, so A, then our next note in A is B. The B chord would be a B minor. Then we would move up to a C sharp, which would be here, and you could play a major or a minor. I'm noodling now just because it sounds so nice. But anyway, and then so that would be our 2 chord would be our B minor. Our 3 chord would be our C sharp minor. And then our 4 chord would be a D major. I have to stop myself. I play D major almost always as a D major 7 as sort of a personal thing of mine, but I'm going to play it the normal major here for learning purposes. I like to play my major bar chords with only 2 fingers. Yeah, essentially what you're doing is you're placing in your major triad. You can use 3 fingers. I prefer using 2 just for convenience. If you can't do that stretch, or you're not confident enough in your bar chords to make that kind of pressure happen, feel free to use 3. I just find that stretch kind of uncomfortable. And for some people, if they already have the strength needed to bar, that 2-finger approach can be super helpful. But anyway, so that's our 4 chord. D major. So A major. So if D major is our 4 chord, then it would make sense that our 5 chord would be E major. Sorry, once again playing major 7. So anyway, so our 1-4-5 would be A, D, E. And so what you can see, hopefully, depending on how well you can see my fretboard, is that we've made the 1-4-5 progression completely within the range of 5 frets. So just like all your open chords can be played in 3 or 4 frets, a progression with bar chords can take place over only 5. And really, you're only ever going to be barring the 5th and the 7th fret if you want to stay within a 1-4-5 progression in A major. And so the key, of course, is defined by the lowest note on the lowest fret you're going to bar. So for instance, if I wanted to be in the key of B major, my lowest note there is the 7th fret on the E string, that B. That's where we bar, and then we're also going to bar on the 9th fret. So you're only ever barring 2 frets up if you want to do that 1-4-5 progression. Obviously, if you want to throw a 7 chord in there, or a 6 chord, or a 2 chord, or a 3 chord, you might have to bar some different frets. But if we're sticking with sort of that classic 1-4-5 blues progression, you really only have to bar 2 frets. And then you're playing your E major shape, and then your A major shape twice. So you're only using 2 bar shapes, and you've got yourself a chord progression that you can solo over super easily, which I will demonstrate thusly. And so you see how simple that was. 2 bar chords, and you got yourself all you need to solo. Super simple. And the extra nice thing about bar chords then is that knowing those bar chord shapes, every single note in that shape will work when you're soloing. So for instance, if I'm over that A major chord, obviously it's not the most organic sounding thing, but if you're searching for a note, you don't know where to go next, and you know that bar shape, any note that's within that bar shaped chord is going to work nicely. So as long as you know those bar shapes, you also have a whole host of notes to select from to solo on. And that makes, unlocking sort of the mysteries of the fretboard, if you'll forgive some theatrics, super simple, because you suddenly have access to a whole host of notes just based off of 2 bar shapes. And if you learn the extra set of bar shapes, going up just one more, which I am never play because I always play the major 7. So the reason I say that, so if you wanted to play the dominant 7th, you would essentially take your D7 shape and move it. I almost always, when I'm playing up there and I'm playing a major chord, I play a major 7. Mostly because major 7s are the best chords on the planet. That's this little tip from me there. If you don't use major 7s in your chord progressions, you're missing out on a host of beautiful things. But anyway, so major 7 chords are just better. Plus, it's just easier to play because all again is just barring with 2 fingers. And so, why would you not do it? That's a personal opinion, not a music theory fact. Just because I say it doesn't mean you have to use major 7 chords. I just personally love them. So and I'll demonstrate that. For instance, if I'm using that 1-4-5 progression, but I want to start on that D on the 2nd fret, that means I have to shift all my shapes up 1. How pretty that is, and that's all just on that. The magic of major 7s, I tell you. If you tuned in last week, I taught you all about how to play all the open major 7s. Your A major 7, your E major 7. Sounds kind of ass, honestly. I don't like E major 7. And then your D major 7. D major 7, top 10 chords, if you ask me. I also just learned a nice alternate fingering for G major 7. Which is kind of a pain until you realize that you need to mute the A string. And then you realize that you can bend that ring finger down as far as you want. It really doesn't matter. And then you can also shift that up to the 8th fret. Ooh, Michael can count. Did I just play this entire thing in E flat? I am very smart. I was just teaching that entire lesson with my guitar tuned down a half step. That's a pro tip. Some people, I say that like it was a mistake, but many guitar players over the years, Slash, Muddy Waters, love to play in E flat, particularly because the Stratocaster, one of the most, probably the 2nd most sold guitar of all time. I still forget if it's better selling than a Telecaster or not. I can't remember. I don't think so. I think the Telecaster is still better selling. But anyway, the Stratocaster sounds particularly nice when tuned to E flat standard, simply because of how the intonation and the relationship between the scale length and stuff works. So a lot of players played an E flat standard. Eric Clapton liked a good E flat standard from time to time. So anyway, E flat standard's not bad. It just means that I was saying the wrong chord names because I was playing the wrong notes. But anyway, so if you play that shape I was just talking about, that G major 7, and then move it up to the 8th fret, you get a lovely little G major to C major 7 chord. Personally, my favorite is to, instead of playing that G major 7, play a G6 chord, and then go to a C major 7. Probably my most used chord progression of all time, personally. So anyway. So anyway, that wraps it up for the lesson, and it also is going to wrap it up for me here. Thanks to everybody who stopped by. It was lovely having you, and good to know that you guys are enjoying the streams, hopefully. If you have any suggestions, be sure to email me. My email, either just reply to those weekly emails, or my email address is at easily.ma. If you're using your Miami, you can just type in Michael Easley. But yeah, take a listen to the playlist we made for the Guitarist of the Week. That's linked in the email you have. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely rest of your week, and I hope to see you all next week. So my name's Michael, I'm the Vice President of the Guitar Club of Miami, Ohio, and you have been lovely. So I'll catch you next week. See ya.